So, hi everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is more like we're coming to the end of the Community Leads in Africa Summit for today, and we're currently on the last session with Andrew. And so, you're all welcome. It's nice to still have you guys around by this time. So it has really been fun all through the session. So in 1 minute, we're inviting, in less than 1 minute left, we're inviting Andrew to the stage to, come to talk to us and to discuss with us, to tell us how we can choose the right platform for our community while building a community that can scale. So Andrew, hi, you
Hi.
have our mention.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Always happy to talk about platforms. And speaking of which, this is my first time using a T-event. Uh, so forgive me if it takes me a moment to get the screen share up, but I'll do my best here. 1 second. There we go. Is this working? Can everybody see it?
Cool.
Let's see. Yeah, all right. Awesome. Sweet. Okay. Thanks, folks. So, as I mentioned, I love talking about this sort of stuff. I absolutely love community platforms. It's a bit of an obsession. Uh, there's a lot of things I want to cover. So, I'm going to try and zip through this pretty quickly so we have room for questions and conversation at the end. And if there are no questions, then we get out of here pretty early. I know it's getting late. So let's just have fun and have a little chat. So, hi, I'm Andy. The setup for this thing when the organizers first reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to do a session on platforms?" At the time, I was at GoDaddy, community operations at GoDaddy, but everything changed this week. I just leapt back into the world of startups, going and doing my own thing this week. So the best way I can introduce myself now is, "Hi, I'm Andy. I help organizations build and manage community programs." So to give you a sense of where I've been, just so you have some context about my background, this is pretty much it. Back in the 2000s, I was doing online communities as a hobby. So for any of you old timers who remember the days of everyone being on UBB or VBulletin, PHPBB, all those old school message boards, that was my heyday. That's how I got started working on gaming forums and fan sites way back when. Around 2010, started doing in-person events, workshops, conferences, a lot of stuff in the WordPress community. And then I joined GoDaddy in 2015 to get their community stuff up and running. Was there for about 6.5 years doing community operations, community programs, content marketing, all that fun stuff. And as of this Monday, I'm back in the world of startups. So, before I get into the meat and potatoes of choosing a community platform, what I want to start with is that funneled question of defining community. No matter who you talk to in the community space, everyone has their slightly different version of what community is and how they define community. I want to set up this conversation with how I define it. So, when I define community, I define it as a connected group of people with something in common. So, that could be a community of interest where a bunch of folks share the same hobbies or passions. It could be a community of purpose. You're trying to work on something, make something happen. It could be a community of profession. You all have the same job. You're working on the same sort of things in the office, or it could be a community of place, where you live, where you spend time. And the important thing is that everyone in that group is connected to each other, because that's what makes a community. That's what makes it different from an audience. Everyone is connected and they all have that common ground. There's something that unites them. When people first join a community, they're joining because they're looking for something. It's a little bit transactional. They are looking for information, inspiration. They're trying to get help. Uh, but out of the gate, when they're first joining a community, it's because they want something. And it's not until they start coming back again and again and again that they really feel like they're members of the community. So that sense of belonging, the sense of, yes, I am part of this group, grows over time through shared experiences. So doing those shared activities again and again and again. So the way I like to describe that when laying it out to folks who don't quite grok the relationship between content and community is that people join for the content, they come for that information. Using that forum example again, they come across forums because they're looking for answers to questions on Google, and then they find a discussion about it in a message board somewhere. And if they keep coming back to that same message board, like in my case, we bought a new car. I'm having trouble with some things with the car. I keep ending up on the same forums, and I'm starting to build a bit of familiarity with that community about to register because I have questions I want to ask on my own. Like those repeat experiences, that's what leads to community. And that can happen both online and offline. So, my point for setting all this up is that your community is not a single place or destination or platform. Platform is important. I love talking about platforms and tools, but that's not what community is. Community is the people, and your community will exist in more than one place. It will exist in one place online, or in more than one place online and offline. You think about something like, let's say, a meetup group, right? Like a meetup group might have a website, they might have a Slack team, but they come together in person. It's all still one community. It's still one group of people. They just happen to be gathering in different places. Same deal if they're connecting with each other on social media. I see a lot of tension between social media managers and community managers talking about, well, what's really community? Social media managers, that's not community. Well, it can be. If people are connecting with each other through social about the same thing and they identify with each other, my friends, that is community. And so your obligation as a community manager is to the people. Wherever they happen to gather, wherever that group comes together, your job is to serve them. So let's talk about platforms. Different communities have different needs, which means different tools and platforms. Let's see if I can split up. There we go. One community is not going to be the same as another necessarily. As community managers, we do a lot of things. We might be responsible for social media, might be responsible for putting together blog posts, writing content, hosting events, absolutely, putting together meetups, conferences, in-person experiences. We might even do courses. I know community managers who are responsible for learning and training. Often do customer support, answering questions in the community, and we might do programs like super user programs, things like that. No one platform is going to do all the things that we need as community managers. What we need instead is a community stack, a collection of tools that do the things that we need. So here's an example from a database that I'm working on, a little side project that catalogs hundreds of different platforms. And these are the broad categories that I've been looking at. We got website builders, building blogs, landing pages, community sites, groups and forums, internal communities, courses and LMSs. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. We've got a ton of different tools that align to different responsibilities, different things that we are tasked with doing, often as a very under-resourced team of, maybe it's just you, maybe it's you and a few other folks, but all of these things fit within your scope of work, basically. And they're all potentially part of your community stack. And where do you even begin with all of that? When you have a bunch of different things that you're responsible for, and a bunch of different tools and platforms that you have to figure out how to get these different pieces working together. Essentially, in my opinion, it boils down to three questions. And these are the same three questions that I start with whenever I'm talking with folks about how do they get a new community program up and running, or if they're evaluating platforms. You can go into the weeds and ask a bunch of questions, but before you do that, it helps to just zoom out and start with three. The first question is, what do you need? Second question is, what are your options? What's out there? What's available? And third is, what do you recommend? As the community manager, the person tasked with building the community, what are the things that you think you should be using? Let's talk about what you need. So when we talk about what you need, what we're talking about is gathering requirements. So go and talk to your stakeholders, whatever your situation may be. And this is why I don't like being prescriptive about, this is one platform that you should use, or this is one tool that you should use, because it's going to vary. Like I said at the beginning, Every community is different. The tools and platforms that you need are going to be different from another community. So the best way to understand what are those needs is to talk to the people that you're working with. What do you need for your community? Write those things down. Those are your requirements. It's basically a shopping list. Next step, options. What's out there? What's available for you to use to pull into that community stack? Personally, I think the best way to get started with this is to ask other folks who have been there and done that. Ask other community pros. You got this community here online. There's CMX. CMX is a great resource. Community Club, another great resource from the folks at ComSor. A bunch of community managers are in those spaces, willing to answer questions, offer you recommendations based on their own experiences. And if all else fails, you can Google it. That database that I mentioned, the thing that I'm working on, my little side project, it's a Notion database. I got all those different tools listed out. You could check that out for inspiration as well. But what you want to do when you're looking at all of these potential options is you want to evaluate whether or not these tools are a good fit for you. These are the things that I look for when I'm evaluating potential tools. Also, the things that I'm looking for as I'm working on this database. First thing I look at is the marketing site. Is the tool, vendor, platform, are they talking about the things that matter to you? Does it resonate with you? Second one, features and pricing. I really like tools that are product led, which mean usually that you can try it before you buy it. You don't need to go and talk to a sales rep. You can try out a demo or sign up for a free trial or something like that, just to get a sense of what it would be like to use the tool. Airtable, I think, is a great example of something that is really valuable, really flexible, and the fact that you can go and start using it without paying any money is great. Third thing I look for is integrations. Does the tool or the platform play nice with the stuff that we're already using? If you're in an established company, for example, and you're already using, I don't know, Jira, and you have like a website built with WordPress or Webflow, you're using Google Analytics, like, can you plug the potential tool or platform into that environment that you're already using? Fourth thing I look for is help and documentation. Is it clear? Is it thorough? Are you able to find the information that you need? Like, imagine going through the situation of setting a tool up that you haven't bought yet. Look at the docs, look at help, and see, is that clearly laid out? Are there guides, getting started guides that can point you in the right direction? And the fifth thing, closely related to that, is does it have a community? Is there a community for this tool or platform? And what are those users saying about their experience? What questions are they asking? Are they getting the answers that they need? How's the sentiment? Is it positive, negative? Does it look like there's much going on? I love it when there's a tool or a vendor or platform where the team working on that uh, is active within their own community, and they're sharing updates, answering questions, being really proactive about participation. That's a really good sign to me that this is a team that cares about what they're building. So all of these things put together will give you a pretty good sense of what to expect when it comes time to decide on whether or not you want to use a particular tool. And that the third piece of those three questions, what do you recommend? So you have written down all your requirements, you know what you need, you've looked at potential vendors, potential tools and platforms, gotten a sense of what they're capable of. Now you got to figure out, what's the solution that I want to put together for the community that I'm building. Part of that consideration is laying out, well, what's the cost of a particular approach? If you use a certain set of tools, how much is that going to cost in licensing or other incidental costs? How much effort is it going to take to get that solution up and running? If you're looking at, let's say, getting a new blogging platform in place and message boards and chat and some sort of, I don't know, help desk system, like a bunch of different pieces, that effort can compound pretty quickly just with all the different pieces that are in play. And then following up on that, the time, like, how long will it take for you to get this solution in place? What I like to do when I'm going through this exercise with folks is to present those options side by side. And it looks a little bit like this, where we will lay out a few different approaches next to each other. And we have these common points. It's like a pricing table. We have these common points to compare each one against the other. A general overview of what that stack is, what the tools are, how much it's going to cost per year, what the effort is for implementing, and how long it's going to take. And then we'll itemize what are the different tools that we're looking at within this stack. So in this example here, approach number one, lower cost, higher effort. It's going to take a bit more time. Approach number two, kind of in the middle, moderate cost, moderate effort, takes a couple of months to implement. A little bit larger stack, doing a little bit more. And approach number three costs the most, but it has the least effort, probably because you're working with a vendor that has a services team and they can do implementation for you or with you. So it's lower effort on your side and it can be done faster, but the cost is going to be higher. So these are the sorts of scenarios that you can line up against one another when you're having the conversation with, let's say you're building a community for an organization and you have a conversation with the decision maker, the one who's going to be signing the check, so to speak, giving them some sense of control over which way to go is a great way to steer the conversation. It gives you some room. Now, that being said, go in with the approach that you recommend, what you think is the best way forward. Don't lay out any approach that you think is a bad approach. You don't want to end up in that situation where you put in a potential approach that you don't really agree with, but you think, hey, why not? That's not good either. You want to be comfortable with all of the potential approaches that you put forward, but have one that's your favorite. And it's a common practice in pricing for something like software as a service, where the middle approach is usually the recommended or most popular because it's a nice blend of everything. So that's something that you can do to help steer the conversation. So you put all those things together, and what you end up with are a few key points when it comes time to choose your platform, or more specifically, put together your community stack. First off, remember that your community is a connected group of people with something in common. It is not a single place or platform. Your obligation is to the members, and you're going to be choosing the tools and platforms based on the needs of your community. There's no single tool that does everything. Like I said, you're going to need a community stack. You're going to need a custom collection of tools that meet your needs. And you might find some overlap in some tools. Like some tools might do multiple things, and they can be pretty all-encompassing, and that's great. But in all my years of doing this, I've never seen a single platform that does it all. With all of the things that we're responsible for as community managers, there is just so much. No one platform is going to be able to accomplish all of it. And to that point, every community is different. What works for one community may not work for another. But what you can do is you can talk to other community managers, look at what other communities are using, find inspiration from experiences that you like or programs that you think are run quite well, and asking those community managers, what are you using for a platform? It never hurts to be aware of what's out there. That's why I built that database, just to know if the situation comes up where you're asked, hey, do you know how we could solve this problem? Do you know if a tool exists that allows us to do this thing? If you're aware of it, that's a great starting point, rather than being completely in the dark about anything other than your favorite tools. And then when it comes time to choose the tools, answer these three questions. First off, what do you need? Write down your requirements. Number two, what are your options? Do your research, ask around, Google it, and validate, right? Like go through that 5-step process of determining whether or not, based on first impressions, does this tool look like it might be a fit? Do some qualification first. And then third, once you have a pretty good sense of what you would like to use, come up with a few different recommendations, a few different approaches, and present those side by side. So that database I mentioned a few times, communitystacks.notion.site. It's a Notion site with a big old database. You can go in there and poke around and see all the tools that I've been collecting over the years, and they link off to all the different sites for each one. So that's pretty much it. It's a really beefy topic, but because it's so unique per community, the approach is quite straightforward. It's when you get into actually doing the work and like going in and writing down your requirements and evaluating all the platforms, that's where it gets really nitty gritty. But at the end of the day, this is what you're doing when you're choosing a platform: figuring out your requirements, looking at the options, and coming up with some recommendations. So that's it for me. I think we did this in 20 minutes. I'm going to have the slides up and my write up on my blog in another 20 minutes. And if you have any questions, comments, whatever, you can find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Andy MCI is my handle pretty much everywhere. And with that, I will take it to the questions pile. Question here: if your community exists on one platform and you want to move them over to another, how can you do this in a frictionless way? It really depends. That's a really good question. I just went through this process at GoDaddy last summer, where we moved from one vendor to another. It depends on the platforms. If you're going between two platforms that have, let's say, a services team, so this is, I think, a bit more common in enterprise or corporate business community platforms. Usually they can help with the migration. Whoever you're migrating to, usually they'll have some sort of service in place to help you move content over, member data, discussion data, all that, move it over from your old vendor to them. Otherwise, depending on the platforms that you're going between, there might be tools available. One thing I do like about things like Discourse, PHPBB, even like really old school forum software, Zenforo, all those types, is that they all store data in a MySQL database. So you being able to extract that data and structure it in a way that can be imported into another platform is going to be easier than something where it might be like a proprietary format or you have to tap into an API. So again, depends on the platform. Second question: if I invested time and money to bring a community onto one platform and they've invested time into getting to know it, it can be difficult taking people onto a new platform. Yes. If I find one which ticks all the boxes, how can I move that community across? This depends. If you're trying to move a community out of, let's say, Slack to Discord, or you're trying to get them off a Facebook group into a different place, that can be really tough because those communities exist within a different environment. Like if you spend all your time on Slack and you're in a bunch of teams, clicking between like an internal team Slack and a community Slack is pretty low friction, right? Like you're already in there. Same thing with Discord. If you're already hanging out in a couple of Discord servers, adding another Discord server isn't a huge deal. But if you're trying to get somebody out of that app experience onto let's say, a dedicated website, that can be a lot harder. So that's one consideration. And the approach to that is usually a lot of lead time, a lot of collaboration with members, a lot of communication about what you're doing and when and why. The second consideration is if you have a dedicated community on a domain, like on a site already, like yourcommunity.com or whatever, and what you're doing is you're swapping out the software behind it. Like let's say you're going from I don't know, you're going from Khoros or Higher Logic to Insided or something. If the domain is the same and what you're doing is you're changing things behind the scenes, trying to make that as seamless as possible to where your members are still going to the same spot, they still have the same accounts, as much of their data as possible is carrying over. So to them, it's not that they're in a new community, it's that there's been a facelift or there's new functionality. Even with that, you want to do a lot of communication. You want to get people on side and understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it so that they're not caught off guard. They know that there's going to be some change taking place and, kind of upselling that. This is why it's great. This is why it's important. Here's what we can do for you as members that we weren't able to do on the old platform. That was our approach when we migrated the GoDaddy community last year. We were on one platform for like 5 years. We moved to a completely different platform. We tried to transition as much of the old platform as possible. And for the things that we couldn't transfer over, we were very upfront in advance about what we were doing and why. Third question here from Peter: how many platforms are too many? if you use more than one, Facebook groups, Discord, etc. Oh, it depends. I know it's not a great answer. It depends, but honestly, that's the situation in our bit line of business, right? I think a few things to consider is what's the relationship between the community and the individual? Like, is it a community where, like, let's use Facebook groups for example. They joined a Facebook group because the content in the group was interesting and it just kind of shows up in their feed. They don't really have an affinity for other members in the group. They don't really identify as being group members. Um, Chances are they're not going to leave. Like, they're just there because it's part of Facebook. They're a Facebook user first and foremost. Your group just happens to have some good content. That opposed to, let's say, you have a creator, an influencer, a brand who has a strong relationship with their community. That audience that they're trying to turn into more of a community where they're connected to each other, those folks are more likely to follow that brand or influencer or creator wherever they go. So that person could have a Facebook group one day and then they decide, you know what, I'm moving my free community or my premium members only community over to this other platform. I would argue that a good chunk of those members are going to follow because they're showing up in the community for the connection with other people and the connection with that brand or influencer. So the platform matters less than that relationship. I could keep riffing on that, but we'd be here for like a day. It really depends. I'm just going back to the chat here. Swish. All right. There are no other questions. Then y'all have a fantastic weekend. Shout out to the organizers for putting on a great conference, and also a shout out to the T event folks. It looks like I have another platform to add to my database. Y'all have a great evening. Ciao.
All right, Andrew, thank you very, very much. That was really interesting.